Hi, I'm Rachel, and this is my AM reading for Friday, January 13th, 2023. I guess I'm realizing it's a kind of suspicious or spooky day to get back into Friday reads for the first time in a while, actually, and certainly the first time for this new year. I try to, get my reading videos up around Friday, but in general, I've been all over the map with when I feel comfortable enough with stuff to share. But hopefully I can keep this Friday trend going for a little while. But that being said, right now I'm filming on Friday morning. I'm hoping to get this out sometime before the night. I do have to go to work in between, so we'll see how things go. But anyway, as it is the beginning of a new month, I don't want to spend too much time on reading I did in December. In fact, I wrapped up my Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie reading in an earlier video I did earlier this month, so I will link that down below. And I also have my literary newsletter for December, which I can link down below, where I have snippets of my Goodreads reviews of all the books I read that month, and bookish news that caught my fancy, and a book pick, and a book quote, and all that good stuff. So what I do want to start this video with, as I always do with these AM reading videos, is the next short story in this collection by Dorothy Parker. I have been reading one short story by Dorothy Parker per AM reading video since May 2021, and at the end of this month we will reach the finale. So this is the third to last story I'll be talking about, and actually it's more of a sketch than a story, or it's a little bit iffy, but anyway. It is called Welcome Home, which she had published in the Saturday Evening Post in 1922. And this one is kind of, I don't know, the least to my tastes because it's almost a story, except that she doesn't have any dialogue. So instead it's just a rambling exposition account of what's going on, and so it's not fun or interesting, I don't think. But it seems like she's working her way up, or she's certainly written some short stories that I read, a while ago now, by 1922, but I don't know, these sketches aren't my favorite. Anyway, the Welcome Home short story alternates between the Lunts and their Aunt Caroline, who go to visit each other from time to time and don't like each other's homes, basically. The Lunts live in New York City, and Aunt Caroline lives further out in the country. And in all honesty, their lives are somewhat similar, and, the sorts of theater and social events that they go to, with only, I guess, a few differences. I suppose it's fair to say the city is more lively or has the newer stuff. But I don't know, it seems like, they're both sort of judging each other, especially Aunt Caroline saying, like, oh, those poor kids having to live in New York, but they love it there, so, and they've been there for like 14 years, so they seem very happy. So, yeah, it's, I think, more commentary on people just, judging other places and, coming to different conclusions, and, everybody's life is trundling along. But yeah, this one, I don't know, it didn't speak to me as much, so I will move on. The first book I finished this year, I finished on audiobook on Hoopla. This is Kindred by Octavia Butler. Yeah, I'm glad I finally got to this. This is a science fantasy novel that, I've known about for a long time, and Octavia Butler is known as, a founding figure, I think, in science fiction and fantasy letters. Mostly science fiction. I guess this is one of her more fantastical stories, really. It's like not about future activity or future faring or that sort of thing. In fact, it is a time travel novel that brings her character Dana from her life in the 1970s to the antebellum South, where she is linked to a white ancestor, a slave-owning ancestor in Maryland, who keeps on getting himself into trouble and needs saving. And I guess somehow the universe and weird time loops decided that Dana is the only one who could save him, and so she is yanked back to save Rufus over a handful of times, which in the antebellum South, those time periods are usually like a few years apart from one another, and then she goes back home to 1976, and only like a few seconds to a few hours or something have passed, depending on how long she spends in the past, and then she's yanked back again. And I guess in harrowing fashion, the only thing that really forces Dana back into the present is if she feels her life is in imminent danger, and she has to truly believe it. And then that's what finally gets her back to the present. But this is very much a speculative look at what slavery was, and Butler takes, a contemporary figure who, lived in what was then the, modern day, with a modern lifestyle and modern expectations, and brings them back to the South, a black woman who would be treated like property. And so it very much is about Dana surviving a place where, she can't be expected to be treated like a human being. And also, it is a conundrum in a way, and perhaps somewhat allegorical, of having to save this slave master for her own well-being, because if Rufus dies, especially before her next ancestor is born, then she would die. So it's like a Marty McFly situation, but a lot more harrowing circumstances. I found it moving. I found it harrowing. This time period, the antebellum South, is not, the rose-colored glasses time period. I mean, it's just a time period of ill health and superstition and just abject cruelty. The banalities of evil, I think, are on display here. But then on the opposite end, we have the society of the slaves on this plantation, and really it's a testament that the major thing that Rufus's family couldn't take away from them is their humanity, and that they have these bonds together as much as they can together. And it's also commentary on the mammy stereotypes, and why people didn't, violently uprise against the whites. And through this world building, I think Butler makes it clear that it would have been impossible for them to win. They just were outgunned, and due to psychological conditioning and isolation, they couldn't escape their circumstances, or often when they tried, they were dragged back and beaten, and it was just psychologically and physically harrowing for them, and sold down to the South. And it's just not a situation that can easily be overcome. So I feel like the crux of this story really is the relationship between Dana and Rufus, and how Dana becomes this guiding force in Rufus's life. He, I think, sees her as sort of a guiding angel, because she keeps showing up, when his life is in danger. And so she does attempt in a lot of ways to shape him, because she wants him to, be as decent of a person as possible. And of course, there's a big question of, can Rufus overcome his societal conditioning and other personal flaws or not. And the way that Butler goes into this, I feel like, it's not overly moralizing. It's not beating us over the head with, how Rufus is this agent of evil. I feel like he's allowed to be complex in some ways, and his relationships, especially with Dana, are allowed to be complex. But at the same time, Butler doesn't make apologetics for him at all. It's not like she forgets that Rufus is a part of the system and is a deeply flawed individual. But I feel like she was able to do it while not preaching about it and taking away from the power of, the complexity of human conditions. That's my take. I really liked this novel. I felt it was very powerful. I've read that the Hulu miniseries, which finally got me to read this book. I wanted to read it before watching it. It's less well received. I think there's been a fair few changes, and in fact, now I'm hearing that actually the miniseries that was streamed or what have you, I guess last month, is only season 1 of season 2, which I guess makes sense, because I was confused because I was looking at the cast page and it seemed like Rufus was only a little boy in that, and that there wasn't an older Rufus, and I was like, whoa, what's going on there? So maybe we'll see what happens in season 2. I still haven't watched it yet, but I'm curious to, but the book was really good. The next book I finished was an anthology called Wasteland, Stories of the Apocalypse, edited by John Joseph Adams. I ostensibly picked up this collection of post-apocalyptic short stories because I am writing one of my own, and I was kind of hoping for a shortcut, some inspiration, something to yoink from these famous science fiction authors, including Octavia Butler. In here, she wrote one. And of course, I came to the realization that, you know, you can't just do that. And I'm on a different trajectory than a lot of these people. My short stories a lot more like Station 11, and most of these short stories are far flung into the future and are different commentaries than what I'm trying to do. A lot are cynical about sort of religious rapture, or cynical about human nature, certainly. We're more in the zombie apocalypse sort of uprising, although not quite to that extreme, but there's a lot of very altered humans, and usually the monsters, like in George R. R. Martin's story, you know, the monsters are the humans that are more like us rather than the extremely altered ones. So they're interesting stories, but not quite in, usually not quite in the vein of what I wanted. You know, Octavia Butler had interesting commentary about lawlessness and fascist police states, like when, you know, the overarching government breaks down, like, you know, it's something she also talked about in her Parable of the Sower series, or I read the first book, and in a way it's kind of similar to Kindred, because, you know, there's a lawlessness in these and fascist organization in these isolated slave times. But anyway, and there were a couple other stories, I think, that were more near future, and so they were talking about stuff that I was a little more interested in. But overall, I struggle with the fact, here I am trying to write my own speculative short story, but I struggle with speculative short stories because I always want more world building than I end up getting. So there's that. So I feel like this collection wasn't as interesting to me as I thought or hoped it would be, and most of the stories kind of rolled off me, and I was like, I just, not my cup of tea. But a few, you know, stood out. I liked the Octavia Butler and Nancy Kress. Nancy Kress, you know, doing a similar story of sort of a fascist society where, you know, the sick people are separated from the unsick ones, and what that does, you know, in negative ways to society and how we relate to one another. I think my favorite story in here, which is the most optimistic, that's what the editor said, was Waiting for the Zephyr by Tobias Buckle, and that one I think is the most similar to what I was trying to do, and it was about a young woman who was trying to escape her parents' farm and like go on this traveling vessel, trading vessel, and it's almost reminding me of like the traveling Shakespeare group. And there's interesting stuff in there as well about using wind for generation, and that's something that I was definitely thinking about, is like, how do you generate power when the power grid is down? And anyway, yeah, other stories didn't work as well for me, which I talk about in my Goodreads review, but I guess I won't complain about them much here. But yeah, I'm glad I read this, I guess. It wasn't the overly enlightening experience I hoped it would be for my own purposes. Although as I was reading, I finally, I suppose, got myself out of that funk that I needed these authors to, you know, give me ideas. And I just started in my head ruminating on what I could do on my own. So it did sort of unlock something in me and said, you know, you got to stop pussyfooting around this. If you want to write, you got to, you know, generate some ideas. And, you know, if you're not going to be able to, you know, steal from other authors, you can still write yourself. So there we have it. The next book I finished this week is The Futures by Anna Pitoniak. This is one of my top of the Goodreads books, where there's some books on my Goodreads TBR that have been there for a few years, and the ones at the very top I made a New Year's resolution to read this year. And I'm very excited especially to get to this one, because I tried it a few times on my page 112 tag and then put it aside, and then I always feel extra excited and justified when I finally pick those books up, and I really like this book. You know, I remember from the page 112 tag, I thought maybe the writing was a little bit facile on that page, but ultimately I thought this story was compelling. Maybe I'm biased. There's some similarities between me and the main characters in that we graduated college around the same time, and then they moved to the big city. I moved to Washington, D.C., but they moved to the big city in America, New York, where they were moving in together, this couple. They were, you know, romantically involved at Yale, and then they decide to move in together to, like, you know, a dinky Manhattan apartment. Evan, the young man, actually got a very lucrative job at a hedge fund where he's making a lot of money. And then Julia is, you know, less settled for a while, but luckily she has family connections and so forth, and she ends up becoming an assistant at a nonprofit for much less money, but that doesn't necessarily bother her because she and Evan, you know, come from different financial circumstances where she has more, backing from her parents, so so she's not going to starve either way, where actually he comes from more humble beginnings. So I am hinting at the fact that there are going to be schisms between this couple. That's not really the major one, but their financial situations. But Evan does become embroiled in this job, and in fact embroiled in a shady business deal where, the higher up at the company who hired him really lays it on to him and, conditions him into this. I'm trying to, like, take Evan off the hook a little bit, because ultimately he does realize the deal is shady, and he doesn't, immediately alert the authorities or anything, but, he's a young guy with a very little power in the organization trying to talk to somebody with a lot of power, so, I kind of understand where he's coming from and how difficult it is, and how by this point he'd been like working like 18-hour days or something every day at this company, so it really has become his life. And what I feel like is his flaw, that he doesn't even realize is a flaw until much later in the story, is just how much he neglects everyone and everything else. And so he like is sitting there and like upset every time that, Julia isn't, just automatically there for him whenever he needs her. And every time, she might want something for herself, he's, judging her harshly, like, oh, she's so selfish. And to be fair, she doesn't come out and talk to him to say, hey, you're neglecting me, I'm unhappy. She's sort of playing games with him, and she has her own flaws, and her, she gets, involved in an affair that has, far-reaching consequences. They're palling around with a lot of famous people, I guess. They're just in with that in crowd. Anyway, it's a really interesting conceit going back and forth between the two characters, and they talk about the same events and that they both perceive together, but much differently from each other. So it is very much a psychological rendering of people's flaws, about where their own biases or selfishness come in. And so they both have, flaws and are, kind of stuck in their own ways. And then weirdly, Pitoniak writes Julia's parts really from a distance, where she's looking back and she's constantly telling us, well, why did I do this instead of that? Or maybe she's trying to sort of justify or understand what she did, and we know like a big climactic problem is going to come. But Evan's parts are in the present, and so for most of it, he's just so deeply in his own head at that time of the writing, and he doesn't really have any understanding of what's to come beyond that. So I don't know, it was an interesting choice. I guess in general she is a more reflective character than he is. But ultimately the two of them are painted as good people who are stumbling after college, and you make mistakes. And I was starting to think a bit about my own, like, stumbling and mistakes I made, which thank goodness aren't as explosive as some of theirs get at the end of this. It just was a nice reminder also of, getting your footing in the world as a 20-something, as the housing crisis is looming, and I myself was laid off, from one of my jobs because of that, and had to flounder around for what to do next. So, in that way, I guess I have a personal affinity for these characters and what they're going through, and the fact that they have to slip and learn along the way about, basically being adults and making their own decisions and coming to the decision of what they want, or I guess to the journey of what they want, rather than having it prescribed through a bunch of schooling about what they're going to do next. They have to basically decide for themselves. So, some parts of it were on the nose or things like that, but overall, I really enjoyed this story. The next story I have to talk about, I'm about halfway through right now. I am listening to it on audio, and it is Cloud Cuckoo Land by Anthony Doerr. So this story grabbed my interest when it came out, I guess, a couple years ago, a year-ish ago now, because of its Cloud Atlas sort of feel, where, we're in multiple timelines, starting in the past and going into the future, and having this sort of overarching theme about tying these stories together. And then there's a second story that was published at the same time as Cloud Cuckoo Land, by an author who isn't as famous as Anthony Doerr and didn't get as much attention. So I'm hoping after I finish this to read hers and compare them in a blog post. So that's what my to-do. But anyway, Cloud Cuckoo Land is tied together by a fictional text written by a real-life Greek scholar, ancient Greek scholar back in the day. And this is Doerr's sort of love letter to reading and to libraries and the stories that, you know, surpass time, especially as is talked about a lot in this book. So much of literature does not surpass time and is lost to wars and just to degeneration of materials and that sort of thing. So anyway, the stories in play start with the siege of Constantinople, which we are seeing from the perspective of a young girl living in the city who actually stumbles upon a Greek teacher and learns how to read Greek and is raiding an old library to sell manuscripts to Italian merchants. And she comes upon this text, which is this really cutesy, funny text of like a man who's trying to get to a city of paradise called Cloud Cuckoo Land, and he goes on these adventures where, you know, supernatural forces turn him into goats and that sort of thing, or donkeys, and it's I think it's just I think the selling point of that story, as people, the characters understand it, is just how kooky and fun it is. So that's what she's going through, with, although meanwhile, you know, doom is imminently coming from the Ottomans, who are bringing the first cannons, or major cannons of warfare to the scene, so that they're going to be able to do what nobody before them could do, and, you know, break down the wall of Constantinople, which stood for 1,000 years. And the second person from that timeline is Omer, who is a Muslim boy with a cleft palate from a poor family, and he and his oxen are taken basically to help move the cannons and other things to the front lines in a very grueling process. It's a lot of work to move those big-ass cannons. And so he isn't directly involved with the Cloud Cuckoo Land story. I think he's part of Doerr's other commentary about technology not so great, you know, nature being destroyed, a tragedy. So that's what he's going through, and it's something similar in the present day storyline as well. We're following two characters. One of them is an 86-year-old man who is retired by this point, and he used to translate Greek documents, including Cloud Cuckoo Land, and he learned, and he got this affinity for translating ancient Greek during his service in Korea, where he was a prisoner of war and befriended a English classic school teacher. And so then he went on to learn Greek and translate them. And as an old man at the local Idaho library, he is putting on a play with that he created out of Cloud Cuckoo Land, and the children of town are putting it on, and they're doing this dress rehearsal, and meanwhile downstairs there's a teenage boy named Seymour who has become an eco-terrorist, and he is in the library putting an explosive next to the wall to blow up a real estate place next door, because in the technology bad nature good storyline, I have some technology down outside that might be making noise, but in that storyline, Seymour was a young boy. He seems to be, I think he's on the spectrum. He like needs earmuffs to be able to not let the sound overwhelm him, and he got a lot of solace from the woods behind his house, and in fact he even befriended an owl who lived in this old tree, but then real estate developers come to develop the land, and you know, they tear down all the nature, and, you know, the owl goes away, and he is heartbroken. Also, there's, you know, more roadkill accidents as human habitation comes to the land. So I guess that's what jumped him into becoming an eco-terrorist. So that's what's going on in the present. And then finally we go to the future, into the 21st century, and we have a young girl on a generation ship, and I think the major thing is that a pandemic breaks out on the generation ship. I guess this is Doerr's commentary on COVID, because in 2020 there doesn't seem to be any COVID, but in the future he makes a pandemic, and Constance is brought to this room with a supercomputer where she's basically quarantined, and she also has access to this magical digital library where she is, I guess, coming across this story, and also just the past. Like, she's the one who's obsessed with the dying Earth that they left behind, rather than, you know, trying to research the planet that their descendants are going to habitate. And I love generation ship stories, but like so many others, you know, Doerr immediately thinks up this, you know, harrowing problem, although it's, at least it's not a zombie apocalypse. I don't know. It's an interesting conceit. His language is beautiful. Like, he has such a knack, and I'm sure it takes a lot of work, of just putting in all of this rich and lush detail of world building to describe what these people are going through. It's just quite amazing. I feel like the present day storyline is working the least because what he's doing is really slowly eking out the plot points. When you're talking about a trip that takes light years to complete, or talking perhaps about the siege on Constantinople, which, you know, at the time and the warfare they had then took forever to get going, you know, it makes sense for the action to take forever to complete. But this one night in 2020 where there's a play upstairs and this terrorist action downstairs, like, we're really dragging it out here, and I'm wondering why none of the kids have cell phones. So that's where I am right now with this story. And I feel like I've already rambled enough about it, so hopefully I'll still have, I'm sure I'll still have good things to say, or interesting new things to say about it later. And finally, the last thing I want to talk about here is Memories Legion. This is a collection of Expanse novellas by James S.A. Corey. And this was on my anticipated reads list for last year, but I put it off and off because I guess I didn't want to say goodbye to The Expanse, which is a science fiction series which I found through the TV adaptation, and then I read all the books. The last one of the series came out last year, or actually I guess in late 2021. And then on the sidelines of the major story of The Expanse, which takes place in the 24th century and is, well, the main storyline takes place in the 24th century. It's about politics, human politics, as different groups have colonized Mars and the asteroid belt. And amidst, you know, their travels, they come across this ancient alien technology, and it upends their political and socioeconomic systems. But throughout the series, an expansive series, mind the pun, you know, there was a lot of world building and minor characters that came along the way. So James S.A. Corey, which is actually two individuals, they wrote a bunch of like short stories and novellas about these characters and events, and they comprised them all here. And in fact, a lot of these short stories and novellas became part of the Expanse television show, so they're somewhat familiar to me, and I'm already invested in this world enough as it is, although I feel like, I don't know, if I weren't invested in the world, would I care about these stories or these characters? And again, maybe it comes back to my own sort of personal iffiness with short stories in the speculative form, because I'm reading them and there's so much tech and science and military jargon about, you know, the realities of 24th century life that I like because I'm invested in the world now. But if I didn't know anything about the world, would I care without a big expansive novel behind it? I don't know. I like their writing, but, you know, I feel like with the shorter stuff, maybe I do see, like, maybe there's a little too much jargon and not as much of character development or the emotional stakes. Or, I mean, that's nitpicky because I do like what they do. I don't think their characters are soulless, but this isn't literary writing to be snobbish about it. And to bring things back to Anthony Doerr from the last book, although if you want to talk about, you know, world building that is not just lush, but feels believable in a way. This one, I think, is a lot more believable about what can be scientifically accurate in the future. But anyway, yeah, I'm just a few stories into it, and I'm hoping to finish it, and I'll report back later this week, and then my Expanse reading will be over. Unless they go back to the series, but I think they're, you know, they're done and ready to move on to the next thing. So that about covers it for me now. I'm seeing my battery go down and the clock on the wall has ticked longer than I hoped it would, so hopefully I can get this up and edited and uploaded and all that after getting home, and I won't just fall into a post-work stupor or anything like that. But at the very latest, I'm sure I'll have it up by Saturday, but hopefully Friday. And in the meantime, I have plenty of other videos I want to keep making throughout January, and the next one I hope will be my monthly Author's Answer video, where I go back to talking about my writing pursuits. So stay tuned for that. And I hope as we are approaching the midpoint of January, if you can believe it, that you are enjoying your reading, and I hope you're staying safe and healthy out there. Thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.